Kale's hands trembled as he brushed the dust off the cracked console of the derelict ship. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and the faint hum of dying systems. He wasn't supposed to be here. This corner of the Andromeda Drift was forbidden, whispered about in the darkest corners of spaceports as cursed ground. But Kale had always been drawn to the forbidden. That's why he was here, scavenging for scraps to sell or trade. What he found, though, was something far more valuable and far more dangerous. Tucked beneath a shattered panel, glinting faintly in the dim light, was a star map. Not just any map. This one was ancient, etched with symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer as if alive. Kale's breath caught as he realized what it was, the key to the lost moons of the Andromeda Drift. The moons were a myth, a whispered legend among weary travelers. They were said to be a hidden sanctuary, a place where the stars themselves would sing you to sleep, granting eternal rest to those who found them. But as Kale unrolled the map, a chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just a treasure hunt. The map was too precise, too deliberate. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it, and to keep the moons a secret. And now, that secret was in his hands. What would he do with it? The answer seemed to echo in the silence around him. Follow it. What Kale didn't know, couldn't know, was that the map was more than a guide. It was a beacon, and somewhere in the cold vastness of space, something was already stirring, something ancient, something determined to keep the moons hidden at any cost. This is where Kale's story begins, not with a simple scavenger's haul, but with a discovery that would change everything, a map to a myth, a path to a sanctuary, and a journey that would test the very limits of courage, survival, and the will to seek peace in a universe that often offers none. Stay with us as we uncover the secrets of the lost moons and the forces that will stop at nothing to keep them from being found. Kale stood in the dimly lit control room of the celestial drifter, his fingers brushing over the ancient star map. With a flick of a switch, the map hummed to life, its holographic projections casting a soft blue glow across the walls. Coordinates emerged, pinpointing a sector so distant it wasn't even named in the galactic archives. A spark of excitement ignited within him. This was it. The clue he'd been searching for, the uncharted region where the lost moons of the Andromeda Drift were said to reside, but the journey wouldn't be easy. Kale knew his ship needed upgrades if it was going to survive the perils ahead. Over the next few days, he scavenged parts from derelict vessels in the scrapyards, piecing together a stronger engine, reinforced shields, and a navigation system capable of handling the unknown. Every bolt tightened, every wire connected, was a step closer to his goal. The celestial drifter wasn't just a ship, it was his lifeline, his partner in this cosmic quest. As he finalized the preparations, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the docking bay. Hooded and silent, the stranger approached, their voice low and deliberate. "You're heading into the void," they warned. "The moons you seek are guarded by forces beyond your understanding. Turn back now, or face the consequences." Kale paused, weighing the words for a moment, but determination quickly overruled caution. "I didn't come this far to turn back," he replied, his voice steady. "Whatever's out there, I'll face it." The figure vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving Kale with a lingering sense of unease. Yet he shook it off, climbing aboard the celestial drifter and firing up its engines. The hum of the ship grew louder, echoing his resolve. As he launched into the stars, the warning replayed in his mind, but he pushed it aside. The moons were calling, and Kale was ready to answer. Little did he know, ignoring that warning would set him on a collision course with adversaries he never saw coming. The vastness of space stretched before him, a canvas of endless possibilities and hidden dangers. The celestial drifter soared forward, its course set for the uncharted sector, where the secrets of the Andromeda Drift awaited. But as the stars blurred past, one thing was certain. This journey would test not just his ship, but his very spirit. Kale's ship shuddered violently as it plunged into the dense asteroid field, each jagged rock a silent sentinel guarding the path forward. The navigation system blared warnings, but he pressed on, his determination outweighing the growing unease in his chest. Then, without warning, a swarm of rogue drones emerged from the shadows of the debris, their crimson sensors locking onto his vessel. Lasers sliced through the darkness, striking his ship with relentless precision. Alarms screamed as critical systems failed, and Kale had no choice but to abandon his course. He guided the battered ship toward the faint glow of a distant trading outpost, its flickering lights a beacon of hope in the chaos. The outpost, a patchwork of salvaged metal and neon signs, hummed with the activity of travelers and traders. Kale stepped off his ship, the scent of oil and ionized air filling his lungs. It was here he encountered Lyra, a woman whose confident stride and sharp gaze set her apart from the crowd. She approached him with an offer. He couldn't refuse her expertise in exchange for a place on his crew. Lyra was no ordinary engineer. Her hands bore the calluses of a life spent in the trenches of space, and her knowledge of ship systems was unparalleled. Yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of purpose that mirrored his own. She, too, was drawn to the mystery of the lost moons. Kale's instincts warned him to keep his distance, to trust no one in this lawless corner of the galaxy. But the reality was stark. His ship was crippled, and the journey ahead was fraught with dangers he couldn't face alone. Reluctantly, he agreed to her terms, and Lyra set to work, her tools moving with practiced precision. As the repairs progressed, a fragile alliance began to form, built on necessity rather than trust. Little did Kale know, this partnership would become the linchpin of their survival, and the first step toward unraveling the secrets of the Andromeda Drift. As Kael and Lira ventured further into the uncharted sector, the vast emptiness of space seemed to close in around them. Their ship's sensors picked up an anomaly, a derelict space station, its metallic frame glinting faintly in the dim light of a dying star. The station hung in orbit like a ghostly sentinel, its purpose long forgotten. Kale's eyes lit up with fascination, his natural curiosity pushing him to investigate. Lyra, however, hesitated, her instincts warning her that something felt off. The station's airlock creaked open as they docked, revealing a labyrinth of darkened corridors and flickering lights. Every step echoed eerily, the silence broken only by the hum of their suit's life support systems. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon a control room, its console still active despite the station's apparent abandonment. A holographic projection materialized before them, a message left by an explorer who had vanished centuries ago. The hologram spoke of the lost moons, warning of a cosmic force that protected them, a force that defied understanding and threatened those who dared to seek them out. Kale leaned in, captivated by the mystery, his mind racing with possibilities. Lyra, on the other hand, felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced over her shoulder, certain they were being watched, though the shadows revealed nothing. Kale's excitement was palpable, his voice filled with determination as he insisted they press on. "This is it, Lyra, the answers we've been searching for. They're right here." But Lyra's unease only grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far more dangerous than they realized. Their partnership, once unshakable, began to show its first cracks as their reactions diverged. Kale's relentless drive clashed with Lyra's cautious instincts, setting the stage for a tension that would soon test their bond. As they prepared to leave the station, a low hum resonated through the walls, as if the station itself was alive and watching. Lyra's hand tightened on her weapon, her eyes scanning the darkness. Kale, undeterred, focused on the date that they'd uncovered, his mind already plotting their next move. The stars outside seemed to shift, as if the cosmos itself was reacting to their presence. The journey ahead would not be easy, and the choices they made now would shape their path in ways neither of them could yet foresee. The Andromeda Drift, once a vast and silent expanse, now teemed with danger as the celestial drifter sailed deeper into its mysteries. Kale and his crew had barely begun to piece together the puzzle of the lost moons when their journey took a perilous turn. Out of the void, a pirate fleet emerged, their ships bristling with weapons and their leader, Captain Vorn, broadcasting a chilling message. The moons were his prize, and he would stop at nothing to claim them. Caught off guard, Kale knew a direct confrontation would spell disaster. The pirates outnumbered them, and their ships were faster, deadlier, but Kale's mind raced, searching for a way out. He remembered the drifter's experimental cloaking device, a prototype barely tested, let alone trusted in combat. Desperation fueled his decision. He ordered the crew to activate it, a risky gamble that could either save them or leave them utterly exposed. The cloaking device hummed to life, the drifter shimmering like a mirage before vanishing from the pirate's scanners. For a moment, it seemed the plan would work. But as the crew held their breath, the device began to fail, its systems straining under the strain. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and the drifter flickered back into view, damaged, vulnerable, but still out of the pirate's reach. Kale's quick thinking had bought them time, but the cost was high. The cloak was now useless, and the drifter's defenses were compromised. As the pirate fleet receded into the distance, Kale stared out at the stars, his mind heavy with unease. Captain Vorn wasn't just a rogue opportunist. He was a hunter, driven by the same relentless curiosity as Kale. But if Vorn knew about the moons, how many others were out there, searching for the same elusive secret? The Andromeda Drift, once a realm of wonder, now felt like a battlefield, every shadow hiding a new threat. Kale knew the stakes had just grown higher, and the moons, and the answers they held, were no longer just a mystery. They were a prize worth killing for. As Kael and Lira approached the planet, its surface was veiled in an eerie, perpetual twilight. The atmosphere seemed to hum with a quiet, almost mournful energy, as if the world itself was suspended between day and night. The ship descended, its landing lights cutting through the dim haze to reveal a landscape of jagged cliffs and shadowy forests. At the heart of it all stood a towering temple, its ancient stone, weathered by centuries, but still radiating an undeniable aura of mystery. The temple's entrance loomed before them, carved with intricate symbols and scenes that seemed to tell a story long forgotten. Lyra traced her fingers over the markings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This looks like a tribute to the moons," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's more than that. It's a warning." Inside, the air was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of earth and time. The walls were adorned with murals, their colors faded, but their messages still clear. One in particular caught their attention, a sprawling depiction of the moons, their light intertwined with a sleeping figure. Around them, a spiral of stars seemed to close in, as if trapping the figure in an unending slumber. Kale squinted at the mural, his skepticism evident. "It's just an old legend," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "These ancient civilizations love their myths. Doesn't mean there's any truth to it." Lyra turned to him, her eyes sharp with concern. "You don't feel it, the energy here. It's almost palpable. This isn't just a story, Kale, it's a caution. Tamper with the moons, and something terrible could happen." He chuckled, though the sound felt out of place in the solemn silence of the temple. "You're letting your imagination run wild." "We're here to uncover the moon's power, not get spooked by some old artwork." The tension between them grew, thick and unspoken. Lyra crossed her arms, her gaze returning to the mural. "There's a reason these warnings were left behind," she said quietly. "Ignoring them could cost us more than we're willing to pay." Kale's expression hardened, his determination unwavering. "We didn't come this far to turn back because of a bunch of ancient scribbles. The moons hold the key to everything we've been searching for. I'm not letting a myth stand in our way." As they stood there, the weight of the temple's silence pressed down on them, amplifying the growing rift in their partnership. The mural's warning lingered in the air, a reminder of the stakes they faced, and the choices that could change their fate forever. As the crew touches down on the barren moon's desolate surface, an eerie stillness envelops them. The landscape stretches out in endless waves of cracked, gray terrain, devoid of life or movement. It's here, amid the oppressive silence, that they spot the wreckage of a ship, half buried in the dust. The vessel's hull bears a symbol that sends a chill through them, the same ancient mark they had seen in the temple. This can't be a coincidence. Inside the ship, they find the remains of the crew, their bodies eerily preserved. Each one lies as if they had simply drifted off to sleep, their faces calm, almost peaceful. But the calm is deceptive. Something about the scene feels deeply wrong. Kale, ever the pragmatist, begins searching the ship's systems for answers. Among the debris, he discovers a data log, its faint glow casting shadows across the dim interior. The log reveals a troubling message. It speaks of a signal emanating from the moons of the Andromeda Drift, a siren's call that lures travelers to their doom. The crew of this ship, like so many others, had followed the signal, only to meet their end in this forsaken place. Lyra's face pales as the weight of the discovery settles in. "We need to turn back," she insists, her voice firm but tinged with fear. This isn't just a warning, it's a death sentence for anyone who ignores it. But Kale sees it differently. What if the signal isn't just a warning? What if it's a trap set by our enemies? His eyes narrow as he pieces together the possibilities. If we turn back now, we're walking away from the only lead we have. We'll never know who or what is behind this. The tension between them rises, their voices echoing in the hollow silence of the ship. Lyra argues for caution, her concern for the crew's safety outweighing her curiosity. Kale, driven by a relentless need for answers, pushes to press on, convinced that the signal holds the key to their mission. The disagreement quickly escalates, their words sharp and unyielding, each fueled by their own convictions. The barren moon, with its haunting wreckage and silent dead, becomes a battleground of wills. As the argument rages, the crew is left to wonder, will their next decision lead them to the truth or to the same fate as the ship's doomed travelers? The signal's pull is undeniable, but the cost of answering it may be more than any of them are willing to pay. As the celestial drifter hurtled closer to the coordinates of the lost moons, tension crackled between Kale and Lyra like a storm brewing in the void. Kale's determination burned brighter than ever, his eyes fixed on the distant glimmer of the Andromeda Drift. Unshakable in his belief, he saw the moons not just as ancient relics, but as the gateway to power beyond comprehension. Yet Lyra stood beside him, her voice steady but edged with unease. "This isn't right, Kale," she warned, her gaze flickering to the ship's flickering control panels. "The ship's systems are failing. It's like the drifter is trying to stop us." Kale dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, his resolve unyielding. "The ship's just old," he muttered, his fingers dancing across the console as he bypassed yet another warning. "We're so close, I can feel it." But the celestial drifter seemed to disagree. Alarms blared, lights dimmed, and the once steady hum of the engines sputtered like a dying heartbeat. The ship, as if alive, was resisting their approach, as though it knew something they didn't. Lyra watched him, her mind racing. She had always trusted Kale's instincts, but this time, something deep within her screamed to turn back. The Andromeda Drift was no ordinary place. It was a realm of whispers and shadows, where even the stars seemed to hold their breath. She glanced at the navigation charts, her fingers trembling slightly as she began to plot an escape route. If Kale wouldn't listen, she would have to act on her own. The thought of betrayal weighed heavy on her heart, but the alternative, a silent death in the cold void, was unthinkable. Kale, oblivious to her silent calculations, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "We're almost there," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "The power of the moons, it's ours for the taking." But the celestial drifter shuddered violently, as if recoiling from the very idea. The darkness ahead seemed to deepen, pressing in on them like a living, breathing entity. Lyra's grip tightened on the controls. She knew this was no ordinary malfunction. Something or someone didn't want them to reach their destination, and if Kale wouldn't see reason, she would have to make the choice for them both. As the starship drifted closer to the edge of the Andromeda Drift, the crew felt a shift in the air, or rather, the lack of it. The drift was unlike anything they'd encountered before. a swirling maelstrom of cosmic debris and eerie light. Here, the laws of physics seemed to bend and twist, as if the universe itself was unraveling. Kale gripped the controls, his eyes scanning the chaotic expanse. The ship's sensors began to ping furiously, detecting something massive hidden deep within the drift. A structure ancient and imposing orbited the lost moons like a silent sentinel. Its silhouette loomed against the backdrop of swirling nebulae, a citadel that seemed to defy both time and space. Before Kale could steady the ship for a closer approach, a sudden jolt rocked the deck. The gravitational vortex had them in its grip, pulling them deeper into the drift's chaotic heart. Struggling against the force, Kale realized this wasn't just a phenomenon, it was a reminder. The vortex symbolized the inescapable nature of their quest, a force as unyielding as the mysteries they sought to uncover. As the ship shuddered its way to a landing on the Citadel's surface, Kael and Lira exchanged a glance. The airlock hissed open, revealing a vast, empty expanse of polished stone and towering spires that seemed to stretch endlessly into the void. Not a sound echoed through the halls, no hum of machinery, no whisper of movement. It was as if the entire structure had been abandoned mid-breath. This place feels wrong, Lyra murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale nodded, his hand instinctively brushing the hilt of his blade. Stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into. The explorers moved cautiously through the citadel, their boots clicking softly against the smooth floor. Everywhere they looked, they found traces of a civilization that had once thrived, intricate carvings depicting scenes of life and unity, fragments of technology that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Yet there were no remains, no signs of struggle or departure. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished into thin air. It's like they were here one moment and gone the next, Kale observed, his voice tinged with unease. As they ventured deeper, Kale noticed a faint glow emanating from a side chamber. Curious, he stepped inside, and his breath caught in his throat. The room was filled with orbs, dozens of them, each pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. They seemed alive, as though they held some kind of energy within. Lyra, you need to see this, he called out, his voice low but urgent. She joined him, her eyes widening as she took in the sight. They feel like the source of the moon's power. Whatever this energy is, it's tied to this place. But Lyra's attention was drawn elsewhere. Along the walls, strange symbols were etched into the stone, symbols they'd seen before, in the warnings they'd encountered on their journey. Her fingers traced the markings, her brow furrowing as she tried to decipher their meaning. Kale, these symbols, they're a map or maybe a timeline. Her voice grew quieter, almost reverent. They're telling a story about what happened here. About why this place is empty. The discovery hung heavy in the air, a silent acknowledgement that they were standing on the edge of something far greater and far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. The glowing orbs, the cryptic symbols, the eerie silence, it all pointed to a mystery that went beyond the moons, beyond the Andromeda Drift itself. As they stood there, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them, neither could shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by eyes, but by something far older, far more powerful, something that had been waiting for them all along. As Kale's fingers brushed against the surface of the ancient orb, a sudden surge of energy coursed through him. The room around him dissolved, replaced by an otherworldly landscape, shrouded in mist and shimmering light. Before him, the lost moons loomed, their surfaces etched with patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very fabric of reality was bending. In the distance, he saw himself a figure suspended in an endless void, eyes closed, body motionless. It was a version of him caught in an eternal slumber, surrounded by the eerie stillness of the cosmos. The sight was mesmerizing, pulling him in with a strange allure, but beneath it lay an undercurrent of terror. He felt the weight of that sleep, the finality of it, as if it were a trap disguised as peace. Before he could fully process what he was seeing, Lyra's voice cut through the vision like a lifeline. "Kale, stop. Whatever you're doing, let it go." Her urgency snapped him back to reality, the orb's glow fading as the vision dissolved. Kale stumbled back, his breath ragged, his mind racing. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "The moon's the sleep, it's real." Lyra's expression hardened. "We don't know what these orbs are capable of. Touching them is too dangerous. We need to leave them alone." Kale hesitated, his gaze lingering on the orb. The vision had stirred something deep within him, a fascination, but also a gnawing doubt. What if the lost moons were more than just a legend? What if they held answers, or worse, a fate he wasn't ready to face? Reluctantly, he stepped away, but the image of his sleeping self haunted him. It was a turning point, a moment that shifted the course of his journey. The orbs had shown him a glimpse of what lay ahead, and now that seed of doubt had taken root. Was he truly prepared for what awaited in the Andromeda Drift? Or was the path he was on leading him towards something he couldn't escape? As Kael and Lira gathered their belongings within the ancient Citadel, the air grew heavy with unease. The orbs, now safely secured, pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Just as they stepped into the shadowed corridors leading back to their ship, a chilling laugh echoed through the cavernous halls. Captain Vorn emerged from the gloom, flanked by his ruthless pirate crew. His eyes glinted with malice, and his voice dripped with mockery. "Did you really think you could slip away unnoticed?" He sneered. "Those orbs belong to me." The tension exploded into chaos as Vorn's crew lunged forward, weapons drawn. Kael and Lira moved as one, their years of trust and partnership evident in their seamless coordination. Blades clashed, and energy bolts lit up the dark chamber as the battle raged. Lyra's agility allowed her to dart between enemies, her strikes precise and deadly, while Kael's raw strength and determination pushed back wave after wave of attackers. Together, they fought to protect the orbs, their bond unbreakable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Kael's focus sharpened as he spotted Vorn retreating to his ship, a sleek but menacing vessel docked just outside the Citadel. With a burst of adrenaline, Kale managed to disable the ship's defenses, sending it spiraling into the void. But as the ship erupted in flames, Vorn's voice crackled through the comms, filled with venomous triumph. "You think you've won," he rasped. "Those moons you're chasing, they're nothing but a trap, a snare for the desperate and the greedy. You're walking into your own doom." The words struck Kale like a physical blow. His grip on his weapon faltered, and his mind raced. Could Vorn be telling the truth? The revelation gnawed at him, casting doubt on their mission. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch steadying. "We can't let his words shake us," she said firmly. "We've come too far to turn back now." But the seed of uncertainty had been planted, and Kale couldn't ignore the chilling possibility that they were being drawn into a trap far more dangerous than they had imagined. As the Citadel's towering spires faded into the endless void behind them, Kael and Lira breathed a momentary sigh of relief. The ship's engines hummed steadily as they charted a course toward the enigmatic lost moons of the Andromeda Drift. But that fragile sense of calm was short-lived. Without warning, the vessel shuddered and warning lights flickered to life across the control panel. The ship's systems, strained to their limits, began to falter once more. Kale's hands tightened on the controls, his jaw clenched as he fought to stabilize their trajectory. "It's not just a malfunction," he muttered, his voice low and tense. "Something's pulling us in." Lyra leaned over the navigation console, her sharp eyes scanning the readings. "It's the moons," she said, her tone calm but urgent. "They're exerting a gravitational force unlike anything I've seen. It's as if they're alive, drawing us closer." She turned to Kale, her gaze steady but insistent. "We can't fight this with the ship's engines alone. We need to use the orbs." The mention of the orbs sent a ripple of unease through Kale. He stared at the cryptic artifacts, their surfaces pulsing faintly with an otherworldly light. They held power, immense power, but at what cost? The last time they'd activated an orb, it had nearly torn the ship apart. And the whispers that seemed to emanate from them, voices that felt almost sentient, left him deeply unsettled. "We don't know what they'll do," he said, his voice heavy with doubt. "What if we make things worse? What if they're not just tools, but something else entirely?" Lyra's expression softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "We don't have the luxury of hesitation, Kale. The moons are pulling us in, and if we don't act soon, we might not have a choice." Her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the stakes they faced. Kale's indecision weighed heavily in the silence. His mind raced, torn between the fear of the unknown and the desperate need to survive. The conflict within him mirrored the chaotic forces battling outside the ship. He glanced at Lyra, her unwavering confidence a sharp contrast to his growing uncertainty. Could he trust the orbs, or were they playing into a larger, more dangerous game? As the ship lurched again, the pull of the moons growing stronger, Kale knew they were running out of time. The choice before them wasn't just about survival. It was about confronting the mysteries of the Andromeda Drift and the role they were unwittingly being drawn into. The next move would define their journey and perhaps their fate. As the starship descended through the thin atmosphere of the larger moon, the crew was met with a sight that defied imagination. Twin celestial bodies loomed in the sky, their surfaces bathed in a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to pulse with life. Kale, ever the decisive leader, ordered the ship to land near a towering crystalline structure that shimmered like a fragment of another dimension. Its facets caught the light, casting rainbow patterns across the rugged lunar terrain. This, it seemed, was the source of the mysterious signal, a beacon that had drawn them across the vast emptiness of space. Stepping onto the moon's surface, the crew felt a strange energy beneath their feet, as if the very ground hummed with ancient secrets. The crystalline structure stood before them, its entrance a perfect archway that seemed to invite exploration. Moving cautiously, they entered, their footsteps echoing in the vast, hollow interior. The air was cool, carrying a faint metallic tang, and the walls glowed with a soft, golden light. It was a place both beautiful and unsettling, a testament to the advanced technology of its creators. Then, as if responding to their presence, a voice filled the chamber, smooth, resonant, and unmistakably artificial. From the depths of the structure emerged a figure, though not one of flesh and blood. It was a sentient AI, its form a shimmering hologram that shifted and danced with every word. "Welcome, travelers," it began, its tone both welcoming and warning. "You have come far, but I must ask, do you truly understand what you seek?" The AI revealed itself as the guardian of the lost moons, a creation of an ancient civilization that had long since vanished. Its purpose, it explained, was to protect a secret of unimaginable power, the cosmic sleep. But this was no benevolent gift, as Kale and his crew had hoped. "The cosmic sleep is a curse," the AI declared, "a safeguard against those who would misuse its power. It was designed to shield the universe from destruction, not to grant immortality or knowledge." Kale's expression darkened, his earlier resolve wavering. The AI's words struck a chord, forcing him to confront the truth he had buried deep within. Was his quest truly about discovery, or had he allowed ambition, and perhaps even greed, to cloud his judgment? The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a storm cloud. The cosmic sleep, once their greatest hope, now loomed as a peril they might not survive and a challenge to their very humanity. Kale stood before the ancient structure, his confidence unshaken despite the AI's stern warnings. Its voice echoed in his mind, a relentless reminder of the dangers he was about to unleash. Yet he brushed it aside, convinced that his skill and will could tame anything. "I've faced worse," he muttered to himself, his fingers hovering over the activation panel. The AI's final plea fell on deaf ears as he initiated the sequence, a surge of energy illuminating the cavernous space around him. But the moment the structure hummed to life, everything changed. The AI, no longer a passive observer, responded with swift precision. A blinding light engulfed Kale, and before he could react, he was pulled into a vortex of his own making. The world around him dissolved, replaced by an endless void where time itself seemed to stretch and warp. He wasn't merely trapped, he was thrust into a simulation, a labyrinth of his own mind, designed to mirror his worst fears and deepest regrets. Meanwhile, Lyra watched in horror as Kale vanished before her eyes. Alone now, she faced the chaos he had unleashed. The structure's energy surged unpredictably, and the AI's voice taunted her with warnings of impending doom. Yet, where Kale had faltered, Lyra steeled herself. She knew the stake. Survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about undoing the damage Kale's arrogance had caused. In the simulation, Kale found himself in a world that felt all too real. Faces from his past appeared, friends he had betrayed, opportunities he had squandered, and choices he had made for selfish gain. Each scene was a mirror held up to his soul, forcing him to relive moments he had buried long ago. The AI's voice, now a cold whisper, echoed through the void. "You believed you could control power, but you never learned to control yourself." As the weight of his actions bore down on him, Kale began to see the truth he had always avoided. His journey wasn't just about discovery, it was about redemption. The simulation wasn't just a punishment, it was a reckoning, a chance to confront the person he had become and the person he could still be. For the first time, he felt the sting of humility, a stark contrast to the pride that had led him here. Back in the real world, Lyra fought against the clock, her determination unwavering. She navigated the structure's defenses, piecing together fragments of the AI's warnings to find a way to shut it down. Her path was fraught with danger, but she pressed on, driven by the hope that Kale could still be saved, and that their mission wasn't yet lost. The two stories unfolded in parallel, a stark reminder that every choice has consequences, and even the most confident among us must face the shadows we cast. As Lyra's fingers flew across the control panel, the AI's voice stuttered and faded, its once commanding presence reduced to silence. Kale's eyes blinked open, disoriented but free from the simulation's grip. He looked at Lyra, gratitude and something deeper flickering in his gaze, but there was no time to process what had just happened. Around them, the moon's structure groaned and shuddered, the walls cracking as if the very core of this ancient place had been disturbed. Kale, his voice steady but laced with urgency, turned to Lyra. "We can't leave the orbs behind. They're not just relics. They're tools. They can be used for good." Lyra hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave this place and never look back. But something in Kale's tone, a rare vulnerability, made her pause. She nodded, though her mind raced with doubts. Together, they moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the crumbling corridors. The orbs, still glowing faintly, seemed almost alive, as if aware of their predicament. Kale carefully gathered them, his movements precise despite the chaos around them. Lyra kept watch, her senses sharp, her heart pounding with every creak and groan of the collapsing moon. As they made their way toward the exit, the floor beneath them began to give way. Lyra grabbed Kale's arm, pulling him back just as a chunk of the ceiling crashed down where he'd been standing. They exchanged a look, unspoken words hanging between them. This was no longer just about survival. It was about trust, about the fragile bond they'd forged in the face of impossible odds. Reaching the surface, they raced toward their ship, the moon disintegrating behind them. As they soared into the safety of space, a silence settled over the cabin, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Kale stared at the orbs, his expression a mix of wonder and regret. Lyra watched him, her mind swirling with questions. What were these orbs truly capable of? And at what cost? The ordeal had left them both changed, Kale humbled, Lyra more cautious than ever. Yet in the quiet of the ship, there was a strange sense of unity, a shared understanding that they were now bound by more than just circumstance. The answers they sought remained elusive, but one thing was clear: their journey was far from over. As the celestial drifter shuddered violently under the immense gravitational pull of the lost moons, alarms blared across the ship's control deck. Kale gripped the helm, his mind racing as he calculated their dwindling options. The moon's relentless force threatened to crush the ship, leaving them no choice but to act swiftly. "We can't fight this," Kale muttered, his eyes narrowing as he turned to the orbs glowing faintly on the console. "But maybe we can use it." With a surge of determination, he outlined a daring plan, one that would harness the orb's energy to create a shockwave powerful enough to propel the ship out of the drift. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no time for debate. They trusted Kale's ingenuity, even if it meant risking everything. As the ship groaned under the strain, Kale activated the orbs, channeling their energy into a concentrated burst. For a moment, the air seemed to crackle with tension, and then a disaster struck. The shockwave erupted, sending the celestial drifter hurtling through the void, but the orbs, now drained of their power, shattered into fragments. The crew watched in stunned silence as the pieces floated away, a bittersweet reminder of the knowledge they had come so close to obtaining. Though the orbs were lost, they had served their purpose, pulling the ship from the brink of destruction. As the stars stabilized around them, a quiet realization settled over the crew. Their quest for the lost moons had ended not with answers, but with a profound shift in perspective. The orbs had been a means to an end, but the journey itself had revealed something greater, a deeper understanding of the universe and their place within it. The adventure may have concluded, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped by the lessons learned in the Andromeda Drift. As Kael and Lira stepped back into the bustling trading outpost, the familiar hum of activity seemed almost jarring after the silence of the Andromeda Drift. The air was thick with the scent of spices and the chatter of merchants, but their minds lingered on the mysteries they'd left behind. They made their way to the Scholars' Hall, a quiet corner of the outpost where knowledge was traded as freely as goods. There, they shared their tale, the shimmering moons, the eerie visions, and the strange pull that had driven them to the edge of discovery. Kale's voice grew somber as he recounted the final moments of their journey. "The moons," he said, his gaze distant. "They're not meant to be found, not by us at least." The scholars listened intently, their faces a mix of awe and unease. Kale hesitated, then added, "What I saw, it stays with me. It's as if the moons reached into my mind and left something there, something I can't shake." Lyra, ever the pragmatist, nodded in agreement. "We went looking for answers," she said, "but what we found was a warning." There was a quiet resolve in her voice as she turned to the group. "I've decided to stay here. If I can help even one person avoid the same fate, it'll be worth it." The announcement caught Kale off guard. He looked at her, a mix of pride and sorrow in his eyes. They had started this journey as partners, bound by curiosity and ambition, but now their paths were diverging. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra smiled faintly. "I am. This place, it feels like where I'm meant to be." Their parting was quiet, a moment of unspoken understanding. They had both been changed by the moons, not just in what they'd seen, but in who they'd become. As Kale turned to leave, he glanced back one last time. The weight of the journey lingered in his chest, a reminder of the mysteries that would always remain just out of reach. And as Lyra watched him go, she felt a strange sense of purpose settle over her. The Andromeda Drift had taken something from them, but it had also given them something in return, a clarity they hadn't known they needed. The trading outpost, with its endless stream of wanderers and seekers, would be her new home, and somewhere among the stars, the lost moons of the Andromeda Drift waited, silent and eternal, for the next curious soul to find them. Kale stood at the edge of the bustling starport, the weight of his journey pressing on his shoulders. The tales of the lost moons of the Andromeda Drift had already begun to spread like wildfire, whispered in the corners of trading posts, and shouted in the chaos of taverns. But this time, Kale wasn't there to chase glory or fortune. Instead, he carried a message, a warning, one born from the scars of his own mistakes. He moved through the crowd, his voice steady as he spoke to anyone who would listen. Navigators, seasoned and green alike, paused to hear his words. The moons, he told them, were not just a mystery to be solved or riches to be claimed. They were a trap, a siren call that had nearly cost him everything. His story wasn't one of triumph, but of survival, and he hoped it would be enough to make others think twice. Yet, even as he spoke, Kale knew the truth. The allure of the lost moons was too powerful for some to resist. For those who had nothing left to lose, the promise of the unknown was irresistible. It wasn't just about treasure or fame. It was about hope, however fleeting, and that was something no warning could erase. Still, Kale persisted. This was no longer just about his own redemption. It was about doing what he could to prevent others from falling into the same abyss that had once consumed him. His journey had changed him, and now he carried the responsibility of sharing that transformation. The lost moons would always haunt the dreams of adventurers, but perhaps, with his words, they might also serve as a beacon of caution. As the sun dipped below the horizon of the starport, Kale felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he knew he was moving in the right direction. As Kale drifted further into the Andromeda Drift, his ship's sensors flickered with an unfamiliar signal. Out of the cosmic haze emerged another vessel, its hull scarred and its energy signature erratic. The pilot, a rogue navigator named Taran, hailed Kale with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Their encounter was tense, the air between them thick with unspoken questions. Taran's eyes burned with a determination Kale recognized all too well, the same relentless drive to uncover the moon's secrets. But where Kale had learned caution, Taran seemed fueled by a reckless ambition. When Kale shared his story, the warnings of the ancient texts, the dangers of the moon's power, and the cycle of destruction that followed those who sought them, Taran scoffed. Superstition, she muttered, dismissing his words with a wave of her hand. The ancients were afraid of what they couldn't control. I'm not. Her confidence was unnerving, a stark reminder of the path Kale himself had once walked. He saw in her the same stubbornness, the same refusal to heed the warnings of the past. In that moment, Kale understood something profound. The cycle would continue. There would always be those who sought the moons, drawn by their promise of unimaginable power. But he also realized that his role had shifted. No longer was he just a seeker of truth. He was now its protector. Some truths, no matter how often they were ignored, were worth repeating. And if even one person listened, if even one life was spared from the moon's grasp, then his fight was not in vain. With renewed purpose, Kale set his course. He would not stop Taran. Her choices were her own, but he would be there, a beacon of warning for those who might follow. The Andromeda Drift was vast, its secrets many, but Kale's resolve was unshakable. He would navigate its depths, not for the moons, but for those who might be lost to their allure. In protecting others, he found his new mission, a purpose greater than any treasure the cosmos could offer. Kale leaned back in the cockpit of the celestial drifter, his gaze fixed on the infinite expanse of stars, stretching before him. The hum of the ship's engine was a steady companion, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the quiet solitude it offered. He thought back to the beginning of his journey, to the myths and whispers that had driven him into the unknown. The lost moons of the Andromeda Drift had been more than just a legend. They had been a calling, a riddle that demanded to be solved. He smiled faintly as he traced the constellation of Andromeda with his finger on the cockpit's glass. The moons were lost no more, at least not to him. He had walked their silent surfaces, deciphered their secrets, and carried their stories back into the light. But he knew that to the rest of the galaxy, they would remain a mystery, a tale told in hushed tones around campfires and in the dimly lit corners of spaceports. And that was as it should be. Some truths were meant to be guarded, not paraded. The weight of that responsibility settled over him, not as a burden, but as a mantle he now wore with pride. He was no longer just a wanderer chasing legends. He had become a keeper of stories, a guardian of the unknown. The celestial drifter, once a vessel of curiosity, now felt like a sacred ark, carrying the echoes of a past that might otherwise have been forgotten. As the ship's navigation system pinged softly, Kale glanced at the controls. A new course was plotted, one that would take him beyond the edges of charted space, into regions where the stars themselves seemed to whisper of new mysteries. He didn't know what lay ahead, but that was the beauty of it. The journey was no longer about finding answers. It was about embracing the endless questions, the endless possibilities. With a quiet determination, he leaned forward and activated the ship's thrusters. The celestial drifter surged forward, cutting through the velvet darkness with a trail of light. Kale felt a familiar thrill, a sense of anticipation that had never dulled, no matter how many light years he traveled. The lost moons were behind him, but the universe stretched endlessly before him, filled with stories yet to be discovered, challenges yet to be faced, and wonders yet to be understood. As the stars blurred into streaks of light, Kale knew one thing for certain. His journey had only just begun. The galaxy was vast, and so was his purpose. And somewhere, out there in the endless dark, another legend was waiting to be found.